Why did Civil War soldiers engage in line formation? It's not what you assume. Imagine this scenario: thousands of men positioned shoulder to shoulder in broad daylight, confronting rows of enemy combatants merely 100 yards away, calmly reloading their muskets while bullets rip through their ranks. It appears to be madness, a suicidal remnant of a past era. Why would soldiers in the bloodiest conflict in American history, a war characterized by railroads, telegraphs, and terrifying new weaponry, fight in a manner reminiscent of ancient Greek hoplites? The explanation is not one of ignorance or blind adherence to tradition. Rather, it is a chilling, razor-sharp logic born from brutal necessity. Disregard everything you believe you know. Those orderly lines were not a death wish, but rather a chillingly effective strategy for survival and dominance. It resembled a deadly chess match where maintaining one's position signified victory, while retreating led to massacre. The reality encompasses shockingly inaccurate weaponry, the primal dread of cavalry charging through the smoke, the suffocating chaos of the battlefield itself, and a psychological warfare so intense that it shattered men before the bullets were even fired. This is the harsh, concealed calculus behind the Civil War's iconic and horrifying lines. Prepare yourself. You are about to uncover why soldiers marched into that tempest. However, before we proceed, please remember to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. Why did soldiers during the Civil War engage in rigid formations? The answer is far more intricate than one might expect. In conjunction with advancements in firearms, both Union and Confederate forces extensively utilized linear tactics throughout the American Civil War, leading to unprecedented casualties and establishing it as the deadliest conflict in U.S. history. The practice of organized formations and linear combat has been fundamental to European military doctrine since ancient times. When examining Alexander's Macedonian phalanxes, the orderly formations of Roman legions, or the interlocked shields of medieval infantry, it is evident that armies consistently organized themselves into lines or structured groups during set-piece battles. The introduction of gunpowder weapons initially led to infantry being arranged in deep, square columns that combined pikemen and musketeers. This arrangement allowed for movement as a cohesive unit and provided balanced protection from all directions. The widespread use of the bayonet ultimately made pikes redundant, establishing ranged infantry as the norm. Nevertheless, even by the late 1700s, remnants of earlier combat styles remained. Smoothbore muskets offered little more accuracy or range than the slings and bows they replaced. For instance, the renowned Brown Bess was reliably effective only up to approximately 100 yards or 91 meters. Additionally, soldiers continued to rely on swords, bayonets, and lances for close-quarters combat. However, advancements did take place, demonstrating that thin, extended lines provided significant advantages over deep, dense columns by maximizing the number of soldiers capable of observing and engaging a target. Formations transitioned from being 8 ranks deep to merely 2 or 3. Any additional depth rendered it dangerous and impractical for soldiers in the rear ranks to effectively fire their weapons. The inherent inaccuracy of muskets was a key factor that propelled the adoption of volley fire. Firing an entire line's muskets simultaneously at a single target created a saturation effect, ensuring enemy casualties. As a result, military training rigorously focused on enabling soldiers to achieve the quickest possible reloading and firing rates. Frequently, the sheer volume of projectiles fired determined the outcome of a battle. A regiment capable of executing 4 volleys per minute possessed a significant advantage over one that could only manage 2 or 3. The reloading process required soldiers to remain standing in order to utilize gravity for pouring powder into the barrel. Troops were also closely packed shoulder to shoulder in a limited space. This density optimized the number of muskets aimed at the enemy at any given moment, enhancing the formation's firepower. Combat during this era concentrated on psychologically overwhelming the opponent and forcing their retreat. Volley fire had the potential to devastate large portions of an enemy force, breaking morale and leading to a chaotic flight. Linear engagements often resembled a high-stakes test of resolve, with each side waiting for the other to falter and flee first. Volleys were typically followed by bayonet charges intended to exploit gaps in the opposing line and drive them into retreat. Although linear formations were the most effective battlefield strategy available, the psychological strain experienced by individual soldiers within such tightly ordered ranks was undeniable. Why then did they comply? Within the most rigorously disciplined European armies, infantry underwent continuous training and faced severe consequences for disobedience. Prussian forces were particularly feared for their strict discipline, employing punishments such as forcing the offender to run a gauntlet between two lines of soldiers who struck him as he passed. American military leader and President George Washington also recognized the vital importance of professional officers and thorough training. He thus held militia forces in very low esteem, famously likening reliance on them to leaning on a broken staff. Washington further understood the contagious nature of panic, expressing in correspondence his profound concern regarding militia behavior. He noted that their actions and lack of discipline significantly demoralized regular troops, whose officers, with few exceptions, were hardly competent. A key reason infantry consistently maintained their positions in tight formations was the constant threat posed by cavalry. When infantry were deprived of the mutual protection provided by a square line or attack column, they became extremely vulnerable. Individual flanks were left exposed, and excessive gaps between soldiers permitted cavalry to charge directly through, causing significant casualties, regrouping, and launching further assaults. Upholding a solid, uninterrupted line presented a cohesive front of bayonets, discouraging horses from impaling themselves. Although linear formations were susceptible to attacks from the flanks or rear by cavalry, they could be trained to swiftly transition into squares, which offered a much stronger defense against horsemen, as effectively demonstrated by the British against Marshal Ney's charges at Waterloo. However, this defensive capability came with a drawback. Tightly packed formations were more vulnerable to artillery fire. Given the relative inaccuracy of cannons over the centuries, most generals accepted this risk. Engaging in lines provided another considerable advantage. It greatly facilitated the maneuvering of large groups of troops in a cohesive manner across the battlefield. Without this organization, soldiers risked becoming scattered and disoriented. The musket fire produced vast amounts of smoke, significantly impairing visibility after only a few volleys. Remaining in formation enabled soldiers to recognize their comrades alongside them, thereby maintaining unit integrity. When battlefield communication depended solely on shouted commands, musical signals, and flags, preserving formation was crucial to avoid disarray and the collapse of the line. If an army became fragmented during an assault, effective command and control could be entirely lost, making coordinated defense or attack impossible. Although line infantry served as the main combat force of the period, not all warfare conformed to this approach. Historically, irregular and guerrilla tactics were employed, especially in conflicts such as the French and Indian War. The thick forests and challenging terrain of North America, which contrasted sharply with the open fields of Europe, significantly increased the effectiveness of guerrilla warfare. European military forces also utilized light infantry units that were trained to take advantage of cover, disperse, and engage in skirmishes, thereby harassing the enemy and protecting the main battle lines. However, it was crucial that if they faced a cavalry threat, light infantry would quickly attempt to form compact defensive formations or seek safety with line infantry or in uneven terrain. Ultimately, the introduction of more precise firearms, particularly the Meunier ball, greatly increased the lethality associated with line tactics. This was particularly evident during the American Civil War, which also saw armies increasingly adopting trench warfare during sieges such as those at Atlanta, Vicksburg, and Petersburg. These advanced weapons could disrupt cavalry charges from long distances, reducing the battlefield superiority of both massed infantry formations and cavalry units. Nevertheless, linear tactics continued to be employed in some capacity into the early phases of World War I, contributing to the devastating casualties experienced in the initial months of that conflict. Only with the complete integration of breech-loading rifles, mass-produced machine guns, and breech-loaded artillery did the era of close-order combat become entirely obsolete. Undoubtedly, the sight of opposing lines of soldiers standing exposed, seemingly taking turns to fire, seems ridiculous to modern observers. Yet, it represented the most effective fighting method given the technological limitations of the time. Had superior tactics been available, commanders would not have continued to employ lines at the cost of battlefield success. The decline of formation warfare was directly linked to the Industrial Revolution and the groundbreaking technological advancements it introduced. Warfare has persistently evolved, and after the First World War, it transitioned into a form that is much more recognizable to contemporary observers. Therefore, the next time you encounter those images of lines of men standing in an impossibly vulnerable position, remember, it was not madness. It was mathematics. It was a method of managing terror. It represented the harsh, unavoidable logic of the weapons they wielded and the dangers they confronted. Maintaining their position in that organized chaos required a type of bravery that few can truly comprehend. They fought in lines not out of folly, but because it was the only defense they had against the onslaught of cavalry, the uncertainty of war, and the overwhelming, soul-crushing fear of the battlefield. It was the most viable response to a terrifying equation. Their reality necessitated order in the midst of chaos. Ours requires dispersion. Their bravery was demonstrated by holding the line. Ours, perhaps, is shown in departing from it. But consider this. In the midst of smoke and screams, could you have stood shoulder to shoulder, reloading mechanically, witnessing the fall of the man next to you, aware that the thunder of hooves could erupt at any moment? Could you have advanced into that wall of bayonets? The Industrial Revolution did not merely alter our methods of combat. It transformed the very essence of what courage entails. The Civil War soldier, confined within his line, stands at the brink of that transformation, a testament to the harrowing price of progress and the persistent, chilling reality that warfare invariably mirrors the harsh constraints of its era. Their formations may be absent, but the enduring shadow they cast, that remains. What will future generations find utterly unfathomable about our conflicts?